Okay, good. Recording started. So today we will cover the rest of the social entrepreneurship as well as ethics. I think last week we kind of covered most of social entrepreneurships. So we'll have a quick revision of social entrepreneurship before moving on to ethics, and hopefully we'll cover everything to do with ethics as of today. And the remainder of the lecture, we will focus more on revision, giving you hints in terms of the midterm exams and so on. In preparation for your midterm exams, which is, I think will be on the 6th of November, which is a Saturday. So it's the following Saturday, yeah, so not the coming Saturday, but the following Saturday at 8 a.m. will be your midterm exam. Okay, let's just begin with a brief revision of just overview of social entrepreneurships, what we kind of covered last week, and then we'll move on to ethics in startups and entrepreneurships. Okay, so last week we covered social entrepreneurships. Basically, social entrepreneurships is just like any other entrepreneurships, except that we include something to do with social added value of some sort. So in addition to the usual profits, personal values or personal profits, social entrepreneur differ from normal entrepreneur because it has this extra social added values. Yeah? And just because it's social added values does not mean it is not profitable or you don't have any additional personal values as well. It's both social values and personal values as well. So social entrepreneurs can be as profitable as normal entrepreneur, and it's almost pretty much the same thing as normal entrepreneur, except that it's included within one of these various different social added values, which has these kind of sectors. You know, so things to do with environment. When we talk about social, we mean environment or energy. Energy and environment comes hand in hand, but forget that energy talks about energy, such as energy generation, fossil fuel, energy efficiency, and so on. Whereas the environment not only include the pollution comes from the energy industry and so on, but it includes all to do with everything else to do with environment, which also include toxic pollutions and other form of pollution, as well as preserving nature, as well as the preserving the environment as well. So environment is more of a superset, and energy is a subset of environment itself. But when we talk about social, we also mean fair business practices, so kind of fair practices to include minorities and female or women as well as disadvantaged individuals, inclusive of them as well. So social also mean kind of human resource, things to do with health and safety, and in addition, anything to do with community involvements to help the community in a social way, such as the things like education and the arts and donation and helping natural disasters and so on to help the community in general. But it also include product safety or labeling of products in such a way that people can or community can control their health and their nutrition and so on as well. So social enterprise is usually in one of these 6 different sectors. We also talk about the different level of social enterprise as well. And later on, we'll talk more about ethics in terms of social enterprise. So we talk about the social obligated, where basically they obey by the law or the letter of the law, nothing else. A level up is social responsibility, which is more actively using or actively approaching social kind of value-added components or programs. And then the social responsiveness, which means that they are proactive as well. In addition to obeying things by the law and being active, they will also be proactive when it comes to social added values, in addition to personal values and so on. In general, businesses which are not only social values but also personal values are more likely to be sustainable, because most people tend to do things because of personal values, and so not everyone only helping out in terms of social values, because if you only do social value, helping others, you're not going to survive as yourself, or your company is not going to survive as yourself. So social enterprise, it is important that you have both components, both the personal values, make sure the business is sustainable in the long term, as well as additionally the social values, which also need to be added to help the community and help others as well. So social enterprise needs both components as well. In terms of social obligation and so on, which we'll go through in a moment, in ethics, so obeying things by the law does not mean that you are a social enterprise or you are a nice kind of enterprise, because law and ethics are different things, and obeying by the law does not mean you are morally right, which we will go through in a moment. So just remember, social obligation and so on, minimum by the law does not necessarily mean a good thing. We'll go in details in a moment. Then we also cover environment. Environment is one of the bigger in terms of the various different sectors of social enterprises. It covers not only energy efficiency and fossil fuel and nuclear power and so on, but also preserving the environment and about heavy metal toxins and other kind of pollution, in addition to the kind which comes from the energy industry as well. So environment is very important. It's much bigger. It encompasses energy, and it encompasses a lot of other forms of technology and so on, which one example which we can't cover is electric vehicles and so on, as well as petrol vehicles, as well as so-called beasts of burden, the horse and cart and so on, evolution in terms of the environment, changes with social changes and so on, and people adapt to these new environment or these new social demands as well. We also cover environmental awareness, how to make sure that the enterprise, the social enterprise, also be aware of the environment by eliminating waste or through recycling or through other methods, as well as keeping companies or corporations to be accountable for their polluting or other form of waste that impact the environment. Making prices reflect costs, promote diversity, making conservation profitable, which is very important. All social enterprise, it needs to be profitable in some form. It's not all about social added values, because if you only have social added values, then you might not have the sustainability and so on. So it needs to be profitable. The more profitable it is, the more likely to be sustainable in the long term, overall, as well as insisting on accountability of individual as well as of country and nation and cities and so on as well, in addition. So pretty much we finish off the social enterprise or social entrepreneurships, and we move on to ethics. The two kind of related when it comes to the law, the legal side of things. But in this next section, we will cover or we will answer why are ethics important and what exactly represents the so-called right and wrong when it comes to conduct, or how do we develop our own code of conduct when it comes to social or even entrepreneurships or business in general. And what impact does your integrity as well as corporate integrity as well as ethical conducts have on the creation of successful startups or successful entrepreneurships? The topic of ethics is very important. I think it's part of your core curriculum in the sense that I think if you are within international business or business management students, basically the course on business ethics is going to be compulsory for you. So some of you probably have studied ethics already in one form or other in the business ethics course. Others might not, especially students from the science kind of departments such as biotech and computer science and so on, which also take this particular course. Those kind of students might not cover business ethics as such. Yeah, so BA student most likely, since business ethics is compulsory, will have studied or will study business ethics, but those who are not of the BA might not. Okay, so we'll cover kind of general. This is not a course on ethics itself, so we'll try to summarize what is business ethics and how business ethics affect entrepreneurships or startups in general. And we'll try to answer these 4 different questions as well. So what is ethics? Ethics is a set of principles that describe someone's behavior or individual behavior or corporation behavior, behavioral code that explain what is good and right or what is bad and wrong. A lot of these ethics are unspoken. It's not, a lot of it is unwritten and so on. Ethics might outline the moral duty as well as individuals' obligation as well. They provide a basic rules or parameters for conduct any activities in an acceptable manner. So it doesn't have to be a business. The so-called conduct means everyday kind of conduct. Yeah. So in general, a lot of these rules or principles or parameters in general are unwritten or unspoken rules itself. Every individual like yourself learn these ethics through your upbringing. Yeah. So each one will have each person will have their own version of what ethics is all about. It comes from your upbringing, from your home and from your school, from your interaction with your parents, your brothers and sisters, your family, your friends, and also at school. So as you are brought up in your family or in your home, your parents will enforce some kind of ethics, some kind of rules or some kind of principle for you to behave, things which are good and bad, or things which are right and wrong. if you do something wrong, then they will tell you that this is antisocial or not good behavior and so on. But then you also learn these things from interacting with your friends as well as interacting at school. So each person will have their own version, because all of us, we come from different background, different country, different town, different school, or different home. Yeah, so each one of us will have our own version of what ethics is all about. It's from our upbringing. So hence, each person will have a different version, what is acceptable manner, and some of us will have maybe have incompatible, especially from when we come from different culture. I mean, especially in this particular course, we have international student from Europe as well as a Vietnamese student from Vietnam and so on. And each one of us will have will come from different culture. And in each one of our culture, we will have different version of what ethics is all about. So reason for ethical conflicts, and there will be ethical conflicts, not only among ourselves, from our different upbringing, but also within business as well. We'll go through, there will be conflict between business and ethics itself, what we basically will call ethical dilemmas. Yeah, so there will be impact from making ethical decisions and so on. But in general, the reason for ethics or ethical conflicts, the many interests that confront businesses in general, both inside and outside of the organization. Similar to individual as well, each one of us will have our own version of ethics from our upbringing. But then when we interact with others, others will have their own version. So there might be conflicts between the two from different culture or different country or different upbringing and so on. But also ethics would change, society change, society norms of society, morals of society, values would change. So there will be changes with values, the morals and the societal norms. As the environment change, as new technology comes about. I mean, we have seen a lot of example of how things become, which are norm initially, which becomes non-societal norms or non-ethical things like nuclear power, for example, before the tsunami in Japan, nuclear power in Europe or in Germany, as well as in Vietnam. We wanted to use nuclear power in Vietnam, and we were using a lot of technology from Russia and so on. But after the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown in Japan, it becomes unethical to use nuclear power, not only in Europe, but also in Vietnam, and hence a lot of changes. Society or ethical change all the time with society, and with newer technology or with newer natural disasters and so on, things change. You know, it can go from something which is originally ethical into something which becomes unethical with changes in technology or natural disaster. But it could be vice versa as well. Something which is unethical can become ethical as society change as well. So don't forget, it's both direction. You know, it doesn't have to be one direction only. Other reason for ethical conflicts are reliance on some kind of fixed ethical principle. Like we kind of said earlier with the previous bullet points, society changes and ethical change with society, with newer technology, by relying on some kind of fixed principle. As the world change, as technology change, and as society change, that's going to have some kind of conflict with changes. And hence, having a fixed ethical principle rather than an ethical process in which continually change with society and so on can be a problem. So hence there can be ethical conflicts there as well. Ethics and law are two different things. Yeah, so there are some similarity between the two of them. Ethics in general are unspoken, unwritten rules and how we behave, or in terms of our manners or how we interact with others. Yeah, there are unwritten rules of right and wrong, how we talk to each other, and so on. Whereas law is written down in law, or enacted or enshrined in law in each country or regions and so on. So there are slightly differences between the two of them. Ethics, it's much, much bigger. It includes not only the right and wrong, which might be written down, whether it's in rules at the university and so on, not necessarily in law, but written down in terms of code of conducts and other things. But also it includes all the things which are unwritten as well. And there are many unwritten rules and acceptable behavior which are not written down anywhere, but in general, most people will learn from their interaction with their parents, with their families, with their friends, and at school and so on. Whereas law or legal kind of are written rules. Yeah, so in general, ethics are kind of focus more on the positive. If you do something good and right, people will comment that you've done something right or good. Whereas in law, it's slightly different. They tend to focus more on the negative. Yeah, ethics tends to focus more on the positive. Law tends to focus more on the negative. So anything to do with law in general, it tends to be, if you break some kind of law, then there'll be some negative impact on you. So law tends to focus more on negative in form of punishment. If you break certain rules and regulation, then you'll be punished. Whereas ethics tend to focus more on the positive. You do something right, people comment, well done, or that's very good manner, or and so on. So it tends to focus more on positive. And law in general, or legal in general, tends to lag behind ethics. Yes, so typically society change. As society change, new things becomes ethical or unethical. And then the politician or the lawmakers then enacted in law or enshrined it in law and so on. So typically, society will lead with ethics, and then once politicians and lawmakers see things which are being utilized more so in society and so on, then they will enshrine it or enact it in law and write it down in law. And when someone break the law, it becomes illegal and so on, then they will be punished for it. Yeah? Where ethics is not only things which is in law and so on, but outside as well and unwritten as well. So things can appear in one of these four different quadrants. Yeah? So in quadrant one, there are many things which can be ethical or moral, but also legal as well. So in general, things which are good and so on, but then also enshrined or enacted in law as well. In quadrant number two, there are many situations where things can be ethical, but illegal as well. Yeah, so like I kind of mentioned before, ethics tends to lead, and law and so on takes time to catch up. You know, when something becomes ethical or even unethical, lawmakers or politicians, it takes time for them to draft up the law, and then not only that, basically put it, well, especially in democracy, then put it to a vote. If it's in an authoritarian kind of country, then it will go through some kind of process to enact it into law or to enshrine it into law. So it takes time when it comes to law. So things can be ethical initially, but it can be illegal. And in quadrant 3, it can be vice versa. It can be in the opposite direction as well. There are things which are unethical, but legal as well. And in quadrant number 4, there are many things also which are unethical and also illegal. So in general, quadrant 1 and quadrant 4 tend to exist quite a lot when law and ethics are in sync, things which are ethical and legal, and things which are unethical and illegal. In general, these things tend to be quite obvious, and both society and law are in sync. What's different when ethics and law are out of sync, and there are many situations. And one of the situations which we mentioned, for example, things like nuclear power, for example. 10 years ago, before the nuclear meltdown in Japan, nuclear power was ethical. It helps reduce fossil fuel and so on, are reliant on fossil fuel and polluting the atmosphere with carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases and so on. So nuclear power, 10 years ago, it was ethical and also legal. But nowadays, especially after the nuclear meltdowns, nuclear power has become unethical. So it evolves with society, what we kind of mentioned earlier as well. But now, although it might be unethical, the law would take time to catch up as well. For example, in Germany, nuclear power stations are being phased out. So there will be no new nuclear power station, if anything, as they will try to close down nuclear power station as early as possible. So it's becoming enacted in law as well. So before it was, although nuclear power is unethical now, it's still legal, but slowly being phased out. But it takes time for the law and regulation to catch up. And vice versa, things which society has see is ethical now, but still illegal. So in Europe, marijuana and cannabis and so on are becoming more and more in a lot of countries being legalized. So nowadays, well, in certain countries or certain society, use of marijuana and cannabis is becoming ethical, but in the past it was unethical, and law is slowly catching up. So in quite a few countries in Europe, cannabis and marijuana are becoming legalized. So society moves much quicker than the law itself. So sometimes it takes time. In one direction, where something which was illegal and slowly being legalized, or something which is legal which slowly being phased out and legalized, and so on. So in general, quadrant number 2 and number 3, they're less so. Majority of the time, ethics and law tend to be in sync, things which are legal and ethical, or things which are unethical and illegal. But sometimes, because society moves faster than the law itself, it can be out of sync as well. So types of morally questionable acts. In law and society, there are various different things which are gray. It's different to say something which is black and white when it comes to law. Not everything obvious. But not only that, everybody in the class, every individual in the class comes from different background, different country, or different town, whether it's in Vietnam or in Europe and so on. So our ethics, or what we consider the ethics, can be gray at times, or can be different as well. So some morally questionable acts when it comes to against the company, such as expense account cheating or embezzlement or stealing supplies and so on, especially stealing and embezzling, it is enacted in law. So it's obvious if you embezzle or if you steal, yeah, you will potentially be punished. Whereas expense account cheating is very gray. Where do you draw the line when someone cheat on their expense account, for example? It's difficult to say. So there's a lot of gray area there. Other types are role failures, also against the company, things like superficial performance appraisal. Yeah? There's no law against these things. It's difficult to put your finger on it in the sense that can you say that someone superficially performed or appraised someone else with a better performance to help them with their career or help them with promotion or bonuses and so on. These things are very, very difficult to determine. Yeah. Or things like not confronting expense account cheating or palming off poor performers with inflated praises and so on. Yeah, these things happen in enterprise or in entrepreneurships and in businesses and so on. But what do you consider is right or wrong or good or bad? Yeah? It depends on the individuals as well. Sometimes it's not too obvious itself. There's other types such as role distortion. These are for the company, so morally questionable acts for the companies, things like bribery, which is illegal in quite a lot of different countries, including Vietnam and in Europe. But some developing country, bribery might not be illegal as such or against the law or not too obvious as such. Things like price fixings are also illegal, but not only that, morally questionable acts as well as manipulating suppliers and so on. Yeah, certain country, certain region, these things might be enshrined in law or has already been enacted in law. Other countries, these things might not be obvious. Other types of morally questionable acts are role assertion, also for the companies. Things like invested in countries such as Palestine, especially controlled by Israel. I mean, these things can be debatable as well. Yeah, I might say one thing and you might disagree. But ethics comes, each one of us have their own version of ethics itself. Yeah? In terms of Israel controlling the Palestine and so on, can be considered by some as a form of apartheid, but to others, it might not be. Yeah, so, like I said, we can agree to disagree because each one of us would have our own version of ethics, for example. Nuclear power, we can mention already for energy generation. Certain countries still consider nuclear power as ethical and helping the environment and so on, whereas others will disagree. Yeah, so Germany and Vietnam will phase out or stop or will not be using nuclear technology for energy generation. It does not mean that it is right either. Yeah, so other countries like the United Kingdom or France or even the US and China, and as well as many other countries, still think that nuclear technology is ethical and also saving the environment and so on. So here, once again, like Israel and Palestine, it is debatable. Yeah, so there are argument for both sides or argument for both camps. Other examples are not withdrawing product lines in face of initial allegation or inadequate safety. More recently, I probably towards the first few posts on Zalo, I kind of sent you a news clipping on packet noodles. You know, there's certain chemical in packet noodles in Vietnam, as well as the packet noodle being exported to Europe, Ireland to be exact, which has certain, I wouldn't say toxic, but certain chemicals which are not allowed within the food chain, human food chain at least. So those are Vietnam. But in Europe, they have their own food safety issues as well. I mean, a few years ago in Europe, there were problems with horse meat tainted beef or pork and so on. So people were selling beef, especially ground beef, in burger and so on. But it has or it contained horse meat in it as well. And the issue with that, I mean, some of you might think that it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, horse meat can be can taste nice as well. So why is it a problem? The issue with horse meat and beef and so on, beef are produced for human consumption. So you're not allowed to inject a lot of these antibiotics or certain chemicals into cows, especially the cows which are being grown for their food production and so on. Whereas horse in general are not regulated as such. They are beasts of burden and so on. So things like hormones and antibiotics and other chemicals are not being regulated in terms of injection into horse meat itself. Because not every country eats horse anyway. So by including these tainted horse meat into the food itself, yeah, you're actually including the horse meat, which potentially can also contain toxic or hormones or certain antibiotics which are not supposed to be within the human food chain and so on. So in Europe, there was big issues and so on that they found horse meat in ground beef and other meat products and so on, which should not be there. So other matters of moralities, ethical conducts might reach beyond the limits of the law itself, because society change much quicker than the law. It takes time for politicians and lawmakers to enact or enshrine things into law. So requirements of law might overlap at times, but do not duplicate the moral standard of society. And the moral standard of society change much, much quicker. Legal requirements tends to be negative, tends to be more to do with forbidding. It will define things, and then if you break these things, then it will fine you or put you to jails and so on. Whereas societal morality tends to be more positive, tends to encourage you more. So companies which are less polluting and using more in terms of recyclings or environmental friendlies and so on, they tend to be more in terms of encourage when it comes to morality rather than focusing on punishment and forbidding and so on. Legal requirements usually lag behind acceptable moral standard of society. The moral standard of society would change. Certain things would come which are ethical can become unethical. And it can change quicker in society, and vice versa. Things which are unethical can become ethical as well. But it takes time for politicians as well as lawmakers around the world, whether you're in a democracy or in a communist kind of country and so on. These things takes time to be enacted in law. Yeah, so it takes a whole process of someone submitting or drafting what should be in law, politicians and lawmakers, and then submitted it to the country and so on to allow it to be written in law as well. So law in general takes time to be enacted or enshrined. And also adherence or inherent problem arise when people believe law represents morality. It's not always the case. You know, law lacks morality or lacks societal morality. Yeah? So what we kind of covered already back in social enterprises or social entrepreneurships, companies which only focusing on doing the minimum of the law when it comes to societal obligations and so on. Don't forget that society in general tends to, moralities in general tends to move much quicker than the law itself. So just being minimum, obeying the law as well is not necessarily a good thing. You know, the law lacks societal norms. Yes, the social kind of things or issues lag behind the law. So social obligation, obligated companies might not be social companies. You know, because obeying by the law and so on might not be enough as a societal or an ethical way of doing things. So be careful of that. You know, just because you follow the law does not mean you are a social enterprise or a social company or adding social values, because of these inherent problems arise when people believe the law represents morality. Morality will move much quicker than law. The law lags societal morality as such. So in general, ethics and moral standard can be much bigger than the law. So these are legal requirements are things which are enshrined or enacted in law. Don't forget, different country will have different laws, or different region or different towns will have different laws as well. Same with different people, different individuals will have different moralities. But there will be some overlap where there are things which are moral and legal as well. Yeah, so here is things which are moral or ethical, but not necessarily enshrined or enacted in law. And there are things which are legal or in law, which not necessarily reflect ethics as such. Yeah, so and then there are regions which are overlapping as well. So if we look at the four quadrants which we looked at earlier, the first quadrant, things which are ethical or moral and legal, are the intersection between these two circles. Yeah, these sometimes known as Venn diagrams. Actually, let's draw it on this board here. So we have potentially four different quadrants of one circle here. I'm drawing with a mouse, so don't expect it to be perfect circles. Yeah. So the things which are legal and ethical, this is quadrant number one. So things which we looked at in terms of the four quadrants, things which are ethical and illegal, or moral and illegal. Whereabout is that? So this is ethics. Let's put it E for ethics circle, and this is legal. Let's put L. So things which are ethical but illegal will be this region here. So quadrant number 2. Things which are unethical but legal, quadrant number 3 will be here. And then we have the fourth quadrant, things which are unethical and illegal. that will be the outside region. So that this will be the region for quadrant number 4. Yeah. So be careful when you look at that Venn diagrams. You might only see 3 quadrants, but in general, there are 4 quadrants. Unethical, illegal, ethical but illegal, ethical and legal but unethical. Yeah? So the 4 quadrant also represented in the Venn diagram form as well. Yeah, so when you see 2 circles and an intersection, typically most people call it a Venn diagram. A reason why people are unethical, or a reason for unethical behavior when it comes to business or as an individual as well. So reason for things like greed, people just doing things for their own personal gain without others, or like without respect to others and so on. So those are a reason for unethical behavior. Another reason is distinction between your activities at work or individual activity at work and their own personal activities at home as well. So there are 2 things. Yeah, people can do things because of their personal gain rather than the enterprise itself, or vice versa. People are doing for the enterprise itself at the cost of their personal gain or their friends and their family. So there is a conflict between the 2 of them. Other reason for unethical behavior, a lack of foundation of ethics, because each one of us will come from different regions, different country, different background and so on. So when we move, especially from the European or foreign exchange student, come to Vietnam, there's a lot of things which are not part of your upbringing when it comes to ethics, but can be considered as antisocial here in Vietnam, and vice versa as well. Vietnamese, with their upbringing, from what they learn, or how their ethics is formed from their homes and their culture, as well as from their school, coming to Europe country and so on, or their foundations can be different, and hence there might be unethical behavior, whereas from their background or from the foundation, it might be ethical, but in where they eventually work and so on, it might be unethical behavior. There's also survival reasons as well, especially from in developing country rather than developed country, where things are done from hand to mouth. So people are survival. What they do is for survival, hand to mouth kind of thinking. Whereas in more developed country and so on, there might not be reason for the survival unethical behavior, but in poor country and so on, there might be reason because of survival and so on, or sometimes known as bottom line thinking as well. Other reasons for unethical behavior are reliance on others or institution to convey ethical behavior and not the individual itself. So it's blaming on others. It's not my fault. It's the society's fault, or the institution's fault, or it's the government's fault, and so on. So it's about blaming onto others who supposed to be conveying the ethical behavior and so on, and it's not to do with the individual itself. Yeah? So these are reasons for unethical behavior as such. So to be able to remove these unethical behavior as such, you need to, or corporation or enterprise or even startups and so on, needs to establish a certain strategy to enforce, to not necessarily enforce, but reinforce ethical behavior within the companies or the startups itself. Yeah, and you can do these through these so-called code of conduct. Yeah? When I live and work in Europe, in the UK, as well as Austria, in my work contract, there tends to be an appendix which spells out the code of conduct, yeah, my behavior when I am at the company itself. Dress code and so on are within the work contract or labor contract. When I came to Vietnam and so on, and working at the university, these code of conduct are not within the labor contract or the work contracts itself. And more recently, the International University has drafted the code of conduct. It's a separate document, not necessarily part of your labor contract and so on, which spells out acceptable behavior at the university. So ethical practices or strategies to reinforce these ethical behavior at companies and so on. You can have the code of conduct as part of so-called acceptable behavior. What is acceptable behavior at the companies and so on, as part of the work contract or as a separate document distributed among the employees or the co-founders at the startups and so on. So everyone kind of understand what is acceptable, what is not acceptable itself. Yeah, so what is the code of conduct? Code of conduct is a statement of ethical practices, acceptable behavior, unacceptable behavior, or some kind of guideline which an enterprise or individual within the enterprise adhere to. The code of conducts are becoming more and more popular and more prevalent, especially in Vietnam. Before, people didn't really use code of conduct, but now it's becoming more and more popular. And equally, university, international university, it's more of a recent thing rather than has always been there, whereas in my work contract in Europe and so on, in general, most work contracts will have some code of conduct within them. Recent code of conduct are becoming more and more popular and proven to be more meaningful in terms of external legal adherence as well as social development or career developments, and more comprehensive in terms of their coverage, as well as easier to implement in terms of administrative procedures, as well as using them to enforce, especially with human resources and so on. If things are spelled out within your work contract and so on, it can be much more easier to enforce compared to a separate document which is not part of your work contract and so on. It might be a lot more difficult overall for so-called administrative procedures as well as enforcement and so on. It is in a separate document itself. Managerial ethics can be similar to the social enterprise or social entrepreneurships, can be of various different levels. You know, there's the immoral or unethical managers, there's the amoral or in-between kind of managers, and there are the moral or ethical managers themselves. And so there are different levels of ethics involved. The negative ones are the immoral or unethical managers in general. These managers' decisions and actions and behavior are usually negative to or imply a positive and active opposition to what is ethical or moral. And decisions are in accordance to or discordance with acceptable ethical principle. An active negation of what is moral is implied. Yeah? So, for amoral, somewhere in between moral or ethics and unethics, managers in general management is neither moral or ethical, nor immoral or unethical. But decision lies outside the sphere to which moral judgments are applied. Managers' activities is outside or beyond the moral orders in particular code of conduct and so on. A lack of ethical perceptions and moral awareness may or may not be implied. Whereas moral managers or ethical managers, in general, activities will conform to standard or acceptable behaviors or a standard of ethics, as well as rights and behavior. Managers will conform to acceptable professional standards and so on of conduct. Ethical leaderships is commonplace on the part of management. And overall, I mean, it's about societies and ethics and moral standards and so on are good to have. It's like how you interact with society yourself. When you are ethical, when you are good, when you are moral, other people will interact with you, yeah? Whether it's clients or customers or suppliers, other people will enjoy interacting with you. But those which are unethical and immoral, and it's the same with societies, whether you're at home or at school and so on, if you are unethical, if you are immoral, people less likely to interact with you. Yeah? In business, it's the same thing. Immoral managers and so on, through their sort of like immoral or unethical acts and so on, people, customers, suppliers and so on will eventually avoid them overall. So ethics is very important in business because we are operating in society. And society has these unspoken rules and behaviors and so on, so-called ethics and so on. And if you don't adhere to these behaviors and ethics and so on, people in society will less likely to interact with you. So motives for immorals, things we covered like greed and all that earlier, but other reasons are like selfishness. Managers in general care only about themselves or the company's gain, whereas amoral managers tend to be well-intentioned but selfish. Impact on others are not being considered, whereas moral managers and so on are more likely to operate in societies and so on. Management wants to succeed, but only at the confine of sound ethical behavior or perceptions or fairness. Goals and so on. Immoral is all about profitability and success at any price. Amoral is somewhere in between, it's about profitable, but others are not being considered. Whereas moral or ethical managers, profitability within certain confines, legal opinions, as well as ethical standards. Orientation towards the law, immoral managers, legal standards, barriers to them. Amorals, laws are an ethical guide, not necessarily preferable. They prefer to enact things to the letter of the law. A central question is what managers can legally do, whereas ethical and so on, you don't forget society, ethics will lead and law will lag behind. So things which might be in law but not necessarily ethical itself, because ethics of society will change quicker. Obedience towards the law or the letter of the law, but in addition, law is the minimal in terms of ethics behavior. You should do a lot more, especially to society or societal norms. Managers prefer to operate well above what is legally mandated, because society in general tends to lead things. In terms of strategy, exploit opportunity for corporate gains or personal gains, cut corners when it is useful for them. Amoral managers in general give managers free reins. Personal ethics may apply, but only if managers choose it to be, respond to legal mandates, if court require to do so. Whereas ethical or good managers or moral managers will live by the sound of ethical standard, assume leadership position when ethical dilemmas arise, and enlightened self-interest will prevail. Principle to make sure that your company or your startups are ethical as such. These are holistical principle. You hire the right people with the right kind of ethics. Don't get everyone has different version of ethics. If you get the right good people, ethical people, then your companies will become more ethical as such as well. Don't forget your company is just a sum of its people or its employees. Principle number 2, set standard more than rules, because ethics of society isn't fixed. It evolves with time, with technology, with new with natural disasters as well, what we have seen with nuclear power and so on. So by setting standard and so on, you allow it room to move. There's lots of gray area as well. There's setting fixed rules and setting drawing a line such as what is black or what is white can cause problem later on. So by setting a standard, you give certain gray area as well. Don't let yourself be isolated. You surround yourself with good people, then your company and you will be good as well. Principle number 4, the most important principle is to let your ethical example at all time be absolutely impeccable as well. By setting a good standard, other people, other individuals, as well as other companies will enjoy working with you. Your customers, your suppliers, your other kind of stakeholders and so on will enjoy working with you as well. So ethical responsibility consists of 3 major components. You need to institutionalize, maybe have a code of conduct of some sort, to spell out acceptable behavior within the companies. Your people or your employees need to have some kind of ethical consciousness from their background, from their upbringing, and so on, as long as they have these unwritten acceptable behavior within themselves or their consciousness themselves, then the sum of all these good people will end up having ethical companies or startup. As well as having some kind of ethical process. As society changes and so on, rules and standards and so on needs to change with society. Yeah, so some kind of ethical process and structure within the companies itself to end up with an ethical companies as such. Ethics and business decisions, in general, it can be very, very complicated. And in general, ethics tends to create a lot of dilemma, problems in business, yeah, because anything which is ethical will cost the business. But this extra cost has advantages. Like I said, companies as well as individual needs to operate with in society, needs to operate with other people, needs to operate with other companies and so on. Whether it is customers or suppliers or stakeholders and so on, you need to operate with them. But by being moral and ethical, it can cost the business as well. So there is certain conflict between the two, but it's a cost that you have to pay if you want to operate in society. So hence there's a lot of complexity and a lot of dilemma between ethics and business as such. Yeah? So complexity in ethical decisions can have extended consequences, whether in the present or in the futures. But also business decisions involving ethical questions have multiple alternatives as well. So not everything is straightforward. I mean, we kind of talked about nuclear power earlier as well. Yeah, some of you might agree with me, others might disagree with me. But then that is fine, but because of these so-called multiple alternatives and people from different backgrounds and different culture. Same thing what we kind of talk about in terms of Israel control Palestine and so on as well. It can create a lot of debates and so on, so and consequences as well, and multiple alternatives. Ethical businesses often have mixed outcome as well. And most business decisions will have uncertain ethical consequences. So there is a lot of these complexities. It's not meant to be easy. It's not meant to be black and white, ethics and business. There's lots of gray, and hence that's why we talk about principle and standard, yeah, and not basically black and white kind of things. You know, there's a lot of consequences, and there's a lot of dilemma, and there's lots of mixed outcome and multiple alternatives. And most ethical businesses decisions have also personal implication as well. Yeah, so it's hard. And in general, there are four main themes of ethical dilemmas within enterprises or individual or entrepreneurs. There's a so-called conflict of interest. Whatever decision you make in business which are unethical, it's going to cost the business money itself. So there is certain conflict of interest. But your own personal trait or your own personal ethics itself, is from your culture, from your upbringing, and so on, it's going to be different to everyone else, or even to the enterprise or the companies itself as well. So there will be a dilemma there. Different level of openness as well. I mean, companies need to protect their intellectual properties or their secret sauce or secret recipe and so on. Rather being open and with the customers and the publics and so on, you need to protect certain secrets or certain advantages which you have compared to other companies. Don't forget that you have to operate in a competitive marketplace, so there needs to be some things which need to be kept secret as well. So there is another conflict of interest or dilemma when it comes to ethics there as well. And there's also social responsibility to the stakeholders as well, rather than your customers or your suppliers and so on. Who are you responsible for? Yeah, who do you need to report to? Yeah, so it's not necessarily the customers, not necessarily the suppliers, and maybe it's not necessarily the stakeholders which you have to report to yourself. Yeah, so there are always dilemma which exists when it comes to business and ethics. Yeah, and hence, especially for small businesses as well. Ethical dilemmas will be around us all the time. So ethical consideration, corporate entrepreneurships and so on, it can be one of two major forms. It can be internal network issues or leadership issues. Managerial dilemmas will have issues as system issues when it comes to internal network, such as misdirected rewards and evaluation system, or when it comes to structure, it will be restricted communication channels or lack of accountability, or when it comes to policies and procedures, the dilemmas will be a long, complex approval cycle, extensive documentation requirements, or unrealistic performance criteria. When it comes to the leaderships and managerial dilemmas, no vision at the top, lack of commitments from senior executive, or no role models at the top when it comes to people or person, hierarchical biases, as well as to protection. When it comes to culture, there are dilemmas when it comes to ill defined values or lack of fits or values that conflict with the managers themselves. So these dilemmas exist, and you cannot avoid them. And especially the internal networks, it creates a lot of consequences such as careerism, whereas leadership issues, it will create an amoral paradigm. We can discuss amoral earlier, somewhere in between moral and immoral standards. Solution for careerism or these ethical consequences are assessing the activities and making the right decisions and so on. Because you're operating in societies and so on. Being in a moral and ethical kind of companies or managers, other people will interact with you. But if you are not, then you're going to have a lot of problems later on. When it comes to amoral paradigm and so on, corporate entrepreneurship training programs, training the individuals themselves and so on. Like I said, companies is built from individual, and the sum of all good ethical individual will add up to an ethical company's itself. So by having training programs, you put everyone in sync to make sure that everyone knows what is acceptable behavior and what isn't acceptable. Effective corporate entrepreneurship require establishing the needs for flexibility because society constantly change, ethical standards will change, as well as new innovation such as the mobile phones and Facebook. I mean, recently we have issues with the Facebook creating a lot of problems, especially in developing country. Is in the news recently, these whistleblower in Europe. And now governments are deciding how to protect the public from Facebook and other social networks and so on as well. So innovations are constantly changing and changing people's ethics, as well as supporting employees' initiative and risk-taking. By removing barriers and so on, it will help that entrepreneurs, middle managers might face these so-called managerial dilemmas to more closely align their own personal values or their own personal ethics with the organization. Training programs and so on especially will help. It will reduce the need to behave unethically. It put everyone in the companies in sync with each other, including ethical components in corporate programs. In that way, everyone knows what's good and what's bad and so on when it comes to corporate behavior. Will guidelines for institutional compliance, as well as value components into a state-of-the-art corporate entrepreneurship program. So to have an effective corporate entrepreneurships, you need some kind of training programs to put everyone, employees in sync. You need to be able to remove barriers because societies are continually changing. Innovation are constantly come about, and you need to change with innovation and society. Hence, you need to provide support and flexibility for changes as well. Ethical and so on leaderships, it needs to be led by the founders themselves or the co-founders and so on. So opportunity for ethical leaderships by an entrepreneur. An owner has a unique opportunity to display honesty, integrity, and ethics in all key decisions. By doing so, it can interact with other companies, customers, suppliers, will enjoy interacting with you. It might cost businesses and so on to be ethical and so on, but it allows you to operate in society. But if you're unethical, yes, it might cut on costs and so on, but it's like you being unethical at school or with your friends or with your family. People will stop interacting with you overall. So overall, it's bad business to be unethical or immoral. Owner action serves as a model for the employees to follow. So by leading, maybe help with training programs and so on, your companies become ethical and so on, and you interact with more customers and suppliers and so on. An owner value system is critical components of ethical consideration that surrounds the business decision as well. Okay, let's check the time. We have one last slide, and that's the end of business ethics or ethics in entrepreneurship. So currently 12 o'clock. So let's finish this, and then we'll take a 15 minutes break. And then when we come back from the break, we'll do a go through the what will be covered in the midterm exams, what will not be covered in the midterm exams. I'll give you hints for what kind of question which might arise during the exams as well. So let's push to the finish. Issues viewed by entrepreneur or owner of startups and so on. Things which needs a strong ethical stance, things like faulty investment advice or favoritism in terms of promotion, nepotism and chronisms and so on, acquiescing in dangerous design flaw, or misleading financial reporting or misleading advertising, or defending healthfulness of cigarette smoking or other harmful practices and so on. Whereas things which needs greater tolerance when it comes to ethical position, things which are kind of gray and not too obvious, things like padded expense accounts, tax evasion, collusion in terms of bidding, insider trading or discrimination against women or minorities and so on, or copying computer software or even photocopying textbooks and so on at university and so on. So it needs a greater tolerance when it comes to your individual ethical position and so on. Okay, so that's the end of ethics. Your midterm exam will cover everything up to and including ethics, up to including this last slide. So we'll take a 15 minutes break and then we'll come back from the break. Okay, so 15 minutes break. Now it is 11:55, so we'll restart at 12:10. Okay, let's restart. Before we restart, can you hear me?
Yes, teacher.
Good, good, good. Okay, so we covered all of ethics and social entrepreneurships and so on. So the second half of this lecture, we'll go through all the lecture materials, and I will point out what will be covered during the exam, or what will be tested during the exams, and what will not be tested during the exams. Yeah, so hopefully it will help reduce the amount of revision you need to do. Yeah, so there'll be a lot of slides will not be included in the exams. Yeah, so let's go through one at a time. So let me just share you my screen. Okay, so what will be covered, and basically all the question in your midterm exams, there will be 45 multiple choice questions during the exams, and all the questions will be based off or based on lecture 1C and lecture 2B. Okay. In the past, quite a few students has emailed me. They have problems downloading these lecture notes, which I found quite weird. But please let me know. Email me, Zalo me, or whatever, if you have problems in terms of downloading these lecture notes. But all your midterms questions will be based only within these two lecture notes. So let's look at lecture 1C again, and we'll go through slide by slide, and I will detail you what will be covered and what will not be covered. So before we start, good news. Well, I don't know whether you think it's good news or not, yeah, but I think it's good news anyway. The Dean of the Business School has signed off on this new examination or assessment weighting. So your midterm exams is only 15% of your total score when it comes to your assessment. The remainder, which is all the assessments, such as your individual assignments, your EBIS assignments, and your clean tech assignments, as well as class participation, make up the remainder. Yeah, so that's 85%. Will come out of your assessments and all the class participation and so on. So I think it's good news. It makes things a lot easier that we're not all totally reliant on midterm exams and so on, and hence it helps with reducing these social distancing, especially during COVID and so on. Okay, so let's go slide to slide. I'll tell you what will be covered and what will not be covered. This slide is not covered, so you can ignore this slide. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. This will not be covered. This slide will not be covered. This slide will not be covered. Yeah, this is just for your information. That the new weighting, yeah, it will be 15% for the midterm exam. This slide will definitely be covered. Edgar Dell Como experience. Detail to your midterm, your assessment, such as individual assignments and so on, will not be covered. So between slide number 5 up to, let's see, slide number 18 will not be covered. Yeah, so between 5 to 18 is not covered in your exams. 19 may be in your exams. Yeah, so the kind of question which will be asked, yeah, it's what's missing or what is there which should not be there. Yeah, so the startup process, you know, the initial excitement and then the wearing off, the trough of sorrows and the ups and downs, the crash of it in attitude, wiggle of hopes and so on. Yeah. Very likely to appear in your midterm exams. Things like to do with Vietnam middle class and so on, also market shares and so on, or growth potential and so on will be covered during your exams, as well as the free trade agreements in Vietnam. Yeah. The potential are there for Vietnam in terms of growth and so on. I mean, for the past few years, it's been the fastest growing economy in the world, but its future is also bright as well, with the potential growth in terms of marketplace, as well as all these recently signed free trade agreements yet to be enacted in law and so on. So even though a lot of these free trade agreements are talked about, but a lot of them are not in place yet, because it takes time for country to enact a lot of these agreements into law itself before the free trade agreements become active itself. So that will be covered. Bootstrap also covered. Population democracy, it's good to understand the differences between Vietnam and other countries. Vietnam is still a relatively quite young country compared to other countries in Western Europe or in the US itself. Although it is slowly changing since 2009 and so on. I mean, Vietnam's recently updated its two-child policies to allow more than two child. So Vietnam is getting older, and it's at least it's reacting to it. Yeah, so that there's no more the two-child policy. That, I mean, even though it's an unspoken two-child policy, now Vietnamese can have up to 3 or even 4 children per family. These will be covered: entrepreneurial revolution, as well as entrepreneurship and involving concepts. So what will be covered during this slides, definitions and so on. Don't forget that it will be a multiple choice question kind of exams. So anywhere which you see 4 bullet points or 5 bullet points, it makes a very simple way or even to write a multiple choice question. So example here, for example, here you see like 4 bullet points. Things like take calculated risks, venture team, business plan, vision to recognize opportunity. For multiple choice question where you have A, B, C, D, or E. In general, what's missing, what should be there, or what should not be there, you know, that kind of thing. What should belong there? I mean, all of the above, or not all the above, or A, B, C, or D, that kind of question you might be familiar with. Google and so on, this will not be examined. You ignore slide number 37. Survivorship bias, that will be covered in some form or other in the midterm exams. So please do look into that. Ecosystems and so on will not be covered. These are more information for your own purposes and so on. I will not be examining you from slide number 40 up to slide number 44. Yeah, so these information, such as, you know, people's name and amount of capital I invested in these companies, or their age and so on, there's no point for me to examine you. These are more specific in terms of introduction and so on, rather something for me to examine you on. Yeah, so slide number 40 up to slide number 44, you can ignore. Culture will be covered in your midterm exam. Stages of development also will be covered. Things like factor-driven, efficiency-driven, innovation-driven will be covered in some form or other. Similarly, the finding from the Global Entrepreneurial Monitor, especially the latest numbers, 2017, 2018, all the main points will be covered. Yeah? So things which I might have highlighted red and so on, it might appear. Yeah? All the main points, the main reason why Vietnamese choose things like consumers or friends and family or sales and marketing, reason why they fail businesses or give up businesses, or the main reason why Vietnamese fail businesses, those kind of things will be tested. On the major points, on the main points. As well as the main reason why Vietnam makes a bad environment for entrepreneur or may make a good environment for entrepreneur. So in general, when you see a big list of characters or things, right here, there's a big list of factors. I can only test you the top 5 or the bottom 5. So anywhere in the middle, it will not be tested. In general, I can only test you what are the main points or what are the weaknesses and so on. So when you say big list, I don't expect you to memorize everything in the list and their ordering. That's not the point. The main points in terms of exams and so on is I want you to be able to understand what are the strengths of Vietnam when it comes to entrepreneurships, or what are the weaknesses of Vietnam when it comes to entrepreneurships. So don't worry too much about the whole list. Just focus on the 5 top and the 5 bottom. Things like this would not be examined. I will not test you on statistics. These things change from year to year. So it will not be tested. All these percentages would change from year to year. It will not be tested. And things like this would not be tested either. It's quite old results. As long as you understand what are the strengths and the weaknesses in Vietnam, then that's more than adequate for most purposes. So anything which is old data and so on will not be tested. A lot of these things are just meant to be informational. Yeah? No need to memorize it. Culture definitely part of your assessments. And definitely the 6th culture dimension, Hofstede's 6th culture dimension, there'll be 1 or 2 questions based on these things, yeah, especially because it's in the form of a list, yeah, of anything which a list of about 4 or 5 kind of items, which is very likely to be tested, yeah, in the form of multiple choice question. Similarly here, this is quite old data. As long as you understand the weaknesses and the strength, in general from year to year, it tends to be relatively quite stable, the top 5 or the bottom 5. Myth, you can ignore these slides. I will not be testing you on any of the myth. It's just for your informational purposes only. You don't need to memorize these things. Don't forget the exam will be closed book exams, and hence you can only bring in yourself and what's in your head. Yeah, no books, no cheat sheets, no nothing. These things makes very likely to appear. Yeah, it's a list of 6 items. Yeah, it can easily be put into a multiple choice kind of questions. Yeah, what should be in the list, or what should not be in the list, that kind of thing. So things like this, very likely, bullet points, 4 bullet points, or 5 bullet points, highly likely. 6 bullet points and 7 bullet points also are possibilities as well. So anywhere which you see a list between 4 to about 6 or 7, it's very likely to be in a multiple choice question. There's 6 here as well, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 potential. Things like this one here, most likely not. Things like here, Vietnam's strength and weaknesses, latest data and so on, very likely to be testable. Yeah. Old data and so on, it's not testable because it's changing. Latest data, Vietnam's newest data in terms of strength and weaknesses, likely to be tested. Yeah, as long as you're aware of what the market which you're working in is. The same here is old data, so it's unlikely to be tested. As long as you know what the strengths and weaknesses are, in general, from year to year, it tends to carry. Integrative approach will be in your exam in some form or other. You can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 bullet points, very likely. Same here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So anything between 4 and 7 bullet points, yeah, you can easily be copy and paste into a multiple choice question. Entrepreneurial assessment approach will be in your exam. Multiple dimensional approach may be in your exam. This very big list, I don't expect you to memorize everything. Like I said, when you see a big list, top 5, bottom 5 can be tested. Anything in the middle, it's unlikely for me to test you on these things. I don't expect you to memorize everything. It's not going to be helpful for you in your life later on. If anything, the main strength and main weaknesses are good to be aware of. But having said that, this slide number 76, will not be in your exams. Yeah? I'm not a cruel person. I don't expect you to memorize all this and regurgitate it in your exam. Yeah? So I don't think it would be that helpful to you anyway. It's not too relevant anyway. So slide number 76, you can ignore. But like I said, if anything can be tested, only the top 5 and the bottom 5 can be tested if there is any lists you see. Entrepreneurships, many terms for entrepreneurships, yeah. Corporate entrepreneurship, entrepreneurships, and various different other terms as well, which we use quite a lot. 4 kind of corporate entrepreneurship, you see 4 bullet points. Very tempting to put it into multiple choice. There's a list quite long, quite a few, so most likely will not appear. There's a list of 5 items, yeah, very likely to appear. Myths, dispelled myths, will not be in your exam. You can ignore anything to do with myths. So it's just to help you with your understanding and avoid misinformation and so on. But that's what this myths and dispelling myths is all about. But like I said, none of it is in your exam. Bullet points, 4, very likely. Table, 4 items, very likely. Ecosystem, innovation, harvesting, private equity. Yeah. Anything in the list of 4 or up to 7 items can easily be put into multiple choice form. Entrepreneur commandments, 10 entrepreneur commandments. None of it is going to be in your exams. Ignore slide number 87. Biases, Dunning-Kruger, very likely. Yeah. Anything to do with biases and so on, very important. Because we all are human. I don't think there's any aliens in the class. But we are all humans. We are all susceptible to these biases, which, as long as we understand they exist, and hence we can manage ourselves, or we can avoid these things, being fallen into these kind of biases. So things like survival bias, Dunning-Kruger effects, and so on are examinable. They're useful to keep at the back of your mind that we all are human, and we suffer from these human biases in general. Okay, so that's all of slide 1C. So we'll jump to 2B. Let's jump to the start. Tips on how to choose co-founders and so on are very important, especially with modern businesses in general. They are very important, and typical, most businesses, successful business tends to have around like 3 co-founders in general, hacker, hustlers, and hipsters. Every company, almost all companies, successful companies, or startups, need these 3 very important skill sets. You need a manager of some sort, someone to keep people together. So like you need someone with that people skill set. That's the so-called hustler. Then also you need someone with the product skill set, with intellectual property, a good cook or good chef or good singer-songwriter and so on. So you need that technology or that skill person as well, the product or the service person. So you need, every single company, or almost every single company, you need a hacker of some sort. One person who are a specialist of the company's product or the company's service. And then separately, you need someone who is good at selling, a marketer, a salesperson, a designer of some sort. So hence you need a hipster. So almost every company will need these 3 very important skill sets. So highly examinable, because that is real world. Majority of companies will need someone to manage the company, the hustler, someone with the product skill set, the hacker, and someone with the sales and marketing skill sets, which is the hipsters. Those are very important skill sets. That's why a lot of the successful companies in general tend to have around sort of like 2 to 3 co-founders, because they will cover that full range of skill sets that every company needs. So we'll cover the entrepreneurial edge, why you or why me, why Vietnam. We answered why Vietnam already. In here, in this particular section, we tend to focus more on the person, the individual, or the co-founders themselves. Things like this, I would not test you on. Like, these are very old statistics, so most of you were born after 1998. I don't expect you to memorize these numbers. They're there just to give you an information, some kind of idea on how other country operates, especially when it comes to entrepreneurships and so on. So none of these statistics will be tested. In fact, you can ignore slide number 13. Very old information anyhow. Things which can be tested, even though it's relatively quite old data, are things like the oldest child in the family or the only child in the family. Both rich and poor country can have entrepreneur. If anything, poor country tends to have more opportunity than rich country. And in general, most entrepreneurs tend to be young people as well. You don't have to be an old person to be to be an entrepreneur, and motivation, reason most people tend to start, not necessarily in Vietnam, but around the world, it's job satisfaction, achievements, money, opportunity, that kind of thing. So this particular slide will be in your, might be in your exam as such. Here's a list of 3 things, 3 big factors. The team, very important, the idea, business plan, and the resources and so on, very likely to be in your exam. Characters often attribute to entrepreneurs. I don't expect you to memorize everything in this list. Like I said, as long as you know top 5, bottom 5, you are covered. I don't test in general big lists and so on. I don't do anything in the middle. There's no need to do things in the middle. As long as you're aware the major and the main points, or the main strength and the main weaknesses, it's more than adequate enough to do things. Yeah, so things in the middle is not going to be a major impact on your career anyhow. But at least understand just the first few, yeah, like confidence, perseverance, determination, energy, resourcefulness, ability to take calculated risks, or things like maturity, honesty, sensitivity, ability to trust others, commitments, yeah, bottom 5 and so on. That's more than adequate for most purposes. Here's another very old statistic. Most of you were born after these years anyway, so I would not be testing you on these things. Yeah. These are very old data anyhow. Very likely to be tests, you know, bullet points, 4 items. Stress, and as well as how dealing with stress when it comes to the dark side of being an entrepreneur, is in your exams, is examinable. And positives and so on, you know, like I said, bullet points, 4 bullet points, all in a row. Potential to be a multiple choice question there as well. Innovation, things like problems, where business actually come from. So don't get, wherever there are problems, there are people who will pay you to solve their problem for them. Yeah, so source for business potential, yeah, are where problems are. Innovators, adapters, in your exams, as well as nature of creativity process. You see here 4 bullet points. Common ideas killers, not testable. Ignore slide number 29, for example. So things to do with common killers or myths, dispelling myths, and things like that are not testable. That's just for your general knowledge as such. Left brain, right brain, very testable. Slide number 31 is just an exercise. It's not testable, so you don't need, you can ignore slide number 31. Left brain, right brain, it should be relatively quite straightforward. Left brain tends to be more logical, linear, abstract, those kind of things, and right brain tends to be more arty, creative, imaginative, tends to use more the intuition or in the intuitiveness, tends to be more rational and so on. So relatively quite straightforward if you understand what logic people are and what creative people are. That's what left and right hemisphere is all about. Bullet points, 4 bullet points, very likely to be testable. We covered most of this in previous slide anyhow. 4 sections, which we kind of covered already anyhow. And more recently, ethics and social entrepreneurships. will also be in your exams. Ignore myths. You can skip this slide. Social entrepreneurships, there are different terminology for social entrepreneurships, so very likely to be in your exams in one form or other. Social entrepreneur, public entrepreneur, civic entrepreneur, social innovator, or even change agent. So yeah, anything which is a list of 4 or 5, they're likely to be in your exams in some form or other. Different level of social entrepreneurial, social obligation, social responsibility, social responsiveness. Environments, always politically correct kind of, or potential question to be in exams. Yeah, so maybe not in your exams. 4 quadrants, A, B, C, D, or E, that kind of thing. What should be there? What should not be there? Reason for unethical behavior, 5 bullet points, very likely to be in your exams in some form or other. Principle, holistic principle will not be in your exams. Ignore slide number 56. See here, bullet points, 5 bullet points, very likely to appear. Same here, 4 main themes of ethical dilemma, which we just gone through. Too much information here. Ignore slide number 60. This slide will not be examinable. It's too much information. I'm not a cruel person or evil person. I'm an ethical person, so I will not force you to memorize all this. There's no need to. And that's it, really. There's not much to it. Like I said, it's 45 multiple choice question. What will happen during the exams is that in fact, this is pretty much your exam. You will see this on next Saturday, the following Saturday. Some missing here. Let's see. So your exams will be at 8 a.m. on the 6th of November 2021. Number of multiple choice question, there will be 45 multiple choice question. Each question is worth 1 point. You have 60 minutes. The exam is a closed book examination, no cheat sheet, no textbooks. No talking during the exams, no mobile phones used during the exams or tablets. You can bring a calculator if you want. Whatever you do with a calculator, I don't know, but you can bring one if you want. And no dictionary, so no books, no textbooks, no dictionary. There's no textbook for this course anyway. No lecture notes. You can only bring yourself and a calculator. No need to bring a pen, anything like that. It is an online exam. What will happen is that I will go through the list. There are the first 10-20 minutes. It might take 10-20 minutes, yeah, because they're not only my Tuesday class, but your class, Wednesday class. So there are a total of about 70 students in total. Yeah, so that's 70. I need to go through each student, check their photo ID and their name to make sure it is that person who's in exams. The whole exams will be recorded. It's part of the rules and regulation of the university. You need to have a webcam, and it needs to be online, fully viewing you throughout the exams itself. I need to be able to see you in clear light. So you should be able to, I should be able to see your head, yeah, up to here, down to your shoulder. So maybe something like this. I don't want to, the vidcam cannot do things like this, like only see your eyes and maybe your nose, for example, or only your chest, for example. That's not going to be very helpful. In general, your vidcam should, throughout the exams, should be able to see just the top of your head down to your shoulder. This is more than adequate for most purpose. So I can, or the university can see, because it's all recorded, the university can see whether you are cheating or talking or viewing textbooks or lecture notes, that kind of thing. So once I take, I check all your IDs, your photo IDs. If you don't have university IDs, then you can use a photo IDs, as long as it is a photo ID with your full name on the ID. And you're going to present it to the camera, and then I will read, make sure that it is you who is sitting the exam. So it might take a while because there's 70 students in total. Once I've gone through all the IDs and so on, then I will post the link to the exams to the in-call messaging. Yeah, so here's an example of a Google form with a multiple choice. Yeah, so I will, for example, once everything is all completed and so on, I will post the link to the in-call messaging, and then you can click on the link. It will open up the exam to you. Yeah, so so you need to be online and so on. Then you type in your, this is meant to be a sample. You type in your name, my name. You type in your ID and so on, and then you start the exam. You read the question, and then you can answer A, B, C, or D. Yeah, there are 9 sections in total. Each section will contain 5 questions, and you need to be able to answer all that 5 questions before you move on to the next section. Yeah, so there are 5 sections, and each section 5 questions. So once you answer all the questions and so on, I will make available countdown clock as well. So I'll have something like this, maybe countdown timer. Countdown timer. Oops, maybe not this one. Let's try a different one. So there'll be a countdown timer. Once the countdown timer starts, you have 60 minutes to complete your exam. I will give you a 5 minutes warning when you only have 5 minutes left. So make sure that you answer all the questions. There'll be some kind of timer. Where's the timer? Countdown timer. Let's try again. Online stopwatch. That should be here. I think the internet's a bit slow today for some reason. I'm not too sure exactly why. It's loading the timer now. Hopefully, the following Saturday during your midterm exams, we will not have this issue with the internet. Yeah, so 60 minutes. It's very slow today for some reason. I don't know why. Set. So I'll press start, yeah, and I will leave the countdown timer maybe as a tab, yeah. So instead of my pretty face, which you see in the Google meeting, you will see the countdown timer, whatever that is. Countdown timer. Yeah. You see something like this in the background somewhere, and it will count down, and you have 60 minutes to complete your exam. I will give you a 5 minutes warning before the exam completes, just to give you a warning to try to answer all the questions before the exam finishes. Yeah. Any questions so far from anyone?
Yes, sir. Excuse me. I have a question about Chapter 1C.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do we ignore slides 57 and 76?
57. Let me just bring it up. Give me one moment. Let me just switch to sharing my screen as well. $57, you say, yeah? Let me just check. 57, what is that? Yeah, I mean, 57, very old data. As long as you know the top reasons and so on, it's more than adequate. But it's very similar to the global entrepreneur monitors anyway. And what was the other slide, did you say?
Yes, slide 76.
76, let me see, 76, 76, 76. Yes, like I said, I'm not a cruel person. I don't expect you to memorize everything word for word. You can ignore slide number 76.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else with questions? No? Okay, if you have question after the online session now, welcome to email me or send it on Zalo. If you send to Zalo, you get a very quick response straight away. Like I said, if you have any other question after this, you can just contact me. It's not an issue. Okay, if there's no more question, all I can say to you guys now is good luck. Enjoy your revision. Try to be more proactive when it comes to revision. I mean, most of us make the mistakes. Not all of us are good students. Yeah, so most of us make mistakes that we read only, and that is pretty much passive revision. Yeah, reading and hearing and so on. It's passive. if you want to be more effective in your revision, try to summarize it in your word. Maybe write a list, maybe even do a cheat sheet. Yeah, so memorize the cheat sheet, that kind of thing. So you summarize everything out into a cheat sheet in your own words and so on. And then it's a lot easier just to go through the cheat sheet. You're not allowed to bring the cheat sheet into your exam, but at least you got a sheet where you summarize everything in your own word. That is what we call proactive revision. Yeah, so it's not only using your eyes and your ears and so on just to look at things. Yeah? Not all of us have photographic memories, anything like that. But if you write it all in your own words and so on, you are using your muscle memories and other form of memories involved as well to do your revision. And being proactive is a lot more effective overall. So if you could, I know you cannot bring a cheat sheet into your exam, but do prepare a cheat sheet, and it makes it a lot easier for you to revise if you have a cheat sheet with you. Okay, so no more question. Good luck in your exams. Keep healthy. Stay away from COVID if you could. Yeah, otherwise you will not be able to do the exams if you are in hospital and so on. So good luck in your exam. Bye-bye, everyone. I will make this available on YouTube and so on, so feel free to use it as part of your revision if you want.